Good morning, Gail.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello. And hello for those of you who are with us online. And thank you for coming. I think I'm still in this, maybe under the influence of the pandemic, of appreciating when we come together more than I did before. It's nice to be sitting here and be together in community. And so thank you for coming. And so the topic I want to talk about is one that was inspired by the recent retreat I did a self-retreat for a month by myself, and one of the things that I found fascinating was, among other things, was a kind of an investigation or attention to thinking itself. And rather than thinking that thinking is wrong or bad, to investigate it, to see what was going on with thinking in some deeper way. And one of the things that I've known of some time, at least in my mind, is that there are different, what I call levels of thinking, different kinds of thinking. It's not like all thinking are the same. And so to slow down and stop and take a look at the thinking we do, whether it's thinking in images or thinking in words, and start distinguishing the different categories of thinking, the different modes of thinking that we have, because some of the modes are not so good for us. And sometimes those predominate for some people, thinking itself gets a negative reputation in some circles, almost as if all thinking is bad. But thinking is an important part of meditation, and thinking can be generative, it can be useful, it can be supportive of meditation and supportive of life. And thinking can be deadening. Thinking can be the opposite of supporting life. It's kind of deadening, it undermines us. And the unfortunate thing is that maybe for not a few people in this modern world that we live in, maybe the ancient world too, something's gone askew with the way that we think and the way that we get preoccupied in thoughts which are debilitating, undermining. And so to be able to see and recognize that there are different modes of thinking is for some people is a new idea. And it kind of opens a door to beginning to live a little different, to maybe exercise some degree of choice about how we think, what we think about, and just as important, some choice about how we relate to our thinking, the attitude we have about thinking when we're thinking. So it's an important topic of mindfulness, and it can be explored in meditation, certainly, and it could be explored in daily life, and all kinds of situations. I've had a fair amount of interesting kind of discoveries around thinking while driving, because if I have the radio off or not doing other things, talking to people, that I find that I can drive safely, while actually maybe more safely if I'm kind of a little bit tracking my thinking rather than being lost in thought, which twice in this time, living in 30 years I've lived on the peninsula, I was driving on 280, the big highway nearby here, and missed my exit because I was thinking a lot about something. I was kind of absorbed in my thinking. I think I was driving safe enough, because I was tracking, what was going on around me, but not well enough to know where I was and where I was supposed to get off. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call. Wow, that's something. So, but I find that, driving is an interesting place. When I go for walks, I like to hike a lot or go for walks, and when I walk alone, that's also an interesting time to explore this world of thinking and what's going on. And if we don't do that, for some of us, thinking takes over. We're going to automatic pilot, and the thinking just kind of gets churns away without any question and without any choice involved. It's like thinking has a mind of its own, and we better just kind of follow along. Or some people are so strongly wedded to their thinking that it's almost like who they are as a person is their thinking self, is their thoughts. And for some people, it's actually frightening to stop thinking, because then they're not anybody. They're not telling themselves a story about who they are, having fantasies or conversations where they are a player in it, reassuring themselves, or some not reassuring themselves, but still kind of making a self out of it. And that's one of the reasons why some people think a lot, because it's a way of shoring up some self-concept that has become important for feeling safe in the world, or feeling successful in the world, or feeling somehow compensating for how difficult this world is. So in the teachings of the Buddha, there are two modes of thinking. There's many modes of thinking, but in the kind of the what I would call the top level of thinking, the more active thinking, there is two modes. And one mode in the ancient language is called papancha. And papancha sometimes is translated into English as proliferating thinking. So thinking that just proliferates and has a life of its own, just spreads and spins and creates universes of of ideas and things. And sometimes I like to call that discursive thinking. And discursive thinking, where you're giving yourself a discourse, or you're having a conversation with someone or with yourself, or you're involved in commentary, or living in some kind of storytelling mind, fantasy mind, planning the future. The future is completely unknown, so kind of involved in planning, and it's very active, and it's what some people might call mental constructs. We're constructing things and ideas. And some people spend an inordinate amount of time in this world of papancha, of discursive thinking, of the world of constructs. And the other is, the Buddha doesn't call it this. I'll tell you what he says would be in a few minutes. Sometimes I like to think of it as deep thinking. So the first is, I kind of like to think of as shallow thinking, and the other is deep. Sometimes I like calling it contemplative thinking. I don't know what associations you have with the word contemplative, but I have very warm feelings for it. It's a kind of deep kind of spiritual connection that we might feel, and that from that comes a kind of deeper kind of reflection about things. And the important distinction between these two, and this is one of the really important points I want to make today, is when we are looking and paying attention to how we're thinking, is to discover what's the source of our thinking. From where does thinking come? So the papancha thinking that we do, this discursive thinking, the Buddha likens to a puppeteer. So a puppeteer is above the puppet show, and kind of up high above, and has these long strings, and is pulling over all the little puppets to get them to do things. So this is the thinking mind that's kind of up in the head, the control tower in the head, and it has all these tentacles, all these strings that go into our muscles, into our nerves, everywhere all over the body. And if we're caught up in that world, all kinds of big and small muscles are being pulled. The shoulders go up, the forehead gets maybe crunched up, the jaw gets tight, the belly gets pulled in sometimes. And it's fascinating, if some of you maybe have done this in meditation, of being relatively calm and settled and content and minding your own business in meditation. And then your mind, the puppeteer maybe, just has this like really big bang thought. And then the energy is there, and you've been ignited with anger and fury or fear, and all these things have happened in your body. How could that person have said that? And it was 50 years ago, but how could they? How could they have said it? And the puppeteer has, come back from vacation, and suddenly, then the puppeteer is pulling all these strings, and emotional strings, and muscular strings, and postural strings, all kinds of things go into play. And some people live in that world. And for the Buddha to call it the puppeteer means that it's not really who you are, even though it's the only you that you might know, that you've been living your whole lifetime. But no, that's not who you are. There's something different. The deep thinking, the contemplative thinking, the Buddha associates with something he calls the yoni. And the yoni in Pali, I think in Sanskrit as well, means womb. And I think it's meant to be a metaphor as opposed to literally the womb. But it's a wonderful kind of a metaphor of a place that's generative. Something in which something grows and develops and emerges, gestates. And so rather than being a puppeteer as pulling strings, it's something that is flowing, something that is evolving, something generative within that spreads out. And it can feel very different. Sometimes some kind of wonderful creative thinking, or thinking that if you're kind of sometimes in love or something with some place or person or thing, and you're kind of in a reverie, kind of thinking about it nicely, it has a very different source than this puppeteer, unless the love has a lot of desire in it. And, and then maybe it's back into the puppeteer mode, where, fear and worry and desires and ambition and all kinds of things. And but this deeper wellspring within, and that's a wellspring, and you can feel how differently it's kind of emerging and flowing upward and outward, filling us. And sometimes it's kind of delicious. Thinking can be if we're in this other mode of being, and that's where kind of wisdom can occur. This papancha is the world of two things. It's a world of often of clinging, grasping attachment of some kind, where we're driven. There's a drivenness. There's a push, and that might be connected to fear. It might be connected to desires. It might be connected to anger. It might be connected to insecurity. All kinds of things that it might be. What we call the attachment that kind of is fueling it. Or it's fueled with what in Buddhism is called selfing, that where we're kind of the part of who we are that's not necessarily kind of who we are naturally in a sense, but who we are as a construct, how we've learned to kind of create an image, an idea, a role, presentation, persona that we want to present to the world. And I remember when I first came to Buddhism when I was about 20 or so, 21, and at Buddhist Center, I went to the Zen Center in San Francisco to visit a number of times. And it was a bit of a shock to be talking to some of the most senior practitioners there who've been practicing for a long time, because it turned out that I was kind of constantly playing the social game of presenting myself as I wanted people to see me. So I was, it wasn't just a construct in my thinking mind, it was a construct in my behavior that I was trying to reinforce. And my friends, they kind of participated in it. Probably we're all doing it for each other and, cooperating. But at the Zen Center, these people had meditated a lot. They didn't react. I didn't get any response. They weren't going to play that game. And so they were this mirror. And I loved it. It's one of the reasons I went back to live at Zen Center. I felt so much, that's where I wanted to live. I wanted to live in a place where I could see myself do these funny things, odd things, because I didn't feel there was much integrity in them. It wasn't coming from a deep place that I wanted to come from. So there's often a lot of selfing, self-ideas. And if you spend some time looking at your papancha, your discursive thought, where your mind is mostly spinning stories and ideas and conversations and what it's doing, chances are relatively high that you're one of the main players in it, that you're not very far away. And And it's probably fairly fair to say that for most of us, if anybody was walking next to us, repeating themselves as much as we're repeating ourselves in our thinking, we'd be begging them to stop. It might even be worse. Yell at them, like, please. But one of the, we can have the same thought, repeat the same thing, over and over again. It's amazing. At least, I don't know, I shouldn't speak for all of you. Maybe some of you are always brand new creative thinkers for every thought you have. But why don't we get bored with it? And one of the reasons is we're the main character or important character in it, and who we are is important. And I don't want to take away the sense of importance, but sometimes that sense of importance, for good historical reasons or current reasons, it's a part of the finding out how to be safe in the world, or how to be successful in the world, or how to belong in this world. And this discursive thinking is kind of become the mode for doing it. However, it can come along with a lot of emotions and moods and attitudes, which, like fear, anxiety, with anger and hatred, and with despair, with with discouragement, with doubt, it can come with strong ambition. It can come with a lot of conceit of all kinds. And so what it means is that if you're having those same thoughts over and over again, you're actually reinforcing that mood on yourself. The influence, not necessarily of the thinking, but the influence of the attitude, the mood, the emotions that come along with it are constantly kind of being registered, influencing, shaping who we are. And that's one of the big dangers of this discursive thinking, is its emotional impact on us. And as I think some psychologists have pointed out, something like a high percentage of people who are depressed because of the rumination. They're having the same kind of thoughts over and over again. And so there's a whole form of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, where they actually look at the nature of the thoughts and what you're thinking, and helping people to think in better ways that don't undermine their psychological health, maybe even their physical health. And so this discursive thinking is not, many times is really not good for us. And it doesn't often do a lot of good if it's repetitive, driven over and over again. And so, as I've said sometimes here, I used to do a lot of planning thoughts. I was anxious about what was going to happen. So I thought if I planned and thought about it, I didn't think, I just did it automatically. I wasn't deciding to do it. And then very, very slowly, it took a long time, it began to dawn on me that my ability to predict the future was dismal. And I would do all this planning and thinking with an image of what it was going to be like in the future, and be ready or something. And it was seldom that way. And after a while, slowly, it dawned on me, Gil, you're wasting a lot of time thinking and planning about things that never occur. They're always different than how you thought. And after a while, I kind of slowly began to give up this neurotic drive to plan and think out and make myself safe for something in the future, because I was not being successful. And so I'm happier now. This is nicer not to always. I do still think ahead. I plan ahead. I think it's an important part of life, but not in that driven way that I had before. And so this. And so in the Buddhist teachings, the discursive thinking gives birth to what's called the 5 hindrances. And these are thoughts having to do with sensual desire or acquiring things, thoughts that have to do with hatred and ill will, thoughts that have to do with resistance and lethargy and giving up, thoughts that have to do with anxiety, regrets, restlessness, agitation, and thoughts that have to do with doubt or uncertainty indecisiveness. What should I do? I don't know what to do. And in contrast, this deep thinking, this thinking from the womb, gives birth to a whole different way of being in the world. And in terms of thinking, one of the characteristics the Buddha gives for someone who has the ability to think from that source is they think about the welfare and well-being of themselves, of others, of both self and others, and of the whole world. So this way of thinking, what's beneficial here? How do people thrive? What's good for people? But it's not just for oneself. Because if it's self-focused, chances are it belongs to the world of the puppeteer. But to have it be an integrative whole, where the thinking is inclusive of so much, that's what I kind of associate with the womb. The womb is the whole world for us. The whole world, everything becomes the place that something can be connected to, and be what allows something generative to grow and develop and flow from within. And as we have kind of opened up in this wide way, then we're not making sharp lines between me and you, me and others. That belongs to the puppeteer. That belongs to the constructing mind that's making a story and making an idea of who I am. When all the constructs become quieter and we have a chance to think from this deeper source, that deeper source is not driven by division. It's not driven by dividing the world between the good and the bad, and the acceptable and the unacceptable, and the right and the wrong, and the right people and the wrong people. That's not its orientation, because it's growing into this wholeness, like an embryo grows into wholeness in the womb. So we're still in this wonderful, womb of our planet that's whole, and we're still growing as adults. And that's a place where we don't divide this kind of way. We still have a sense of others, so we're concerned for them, but the concern is not divided. The way we desire the welfare of the world, the way we think about people. And so we're equally caring for ourselves as we are for others. And I love it that the Buddha says also for self and others, because it's not just the individuals, it's also for the communities we're in, our paired relationship with friends and family, our larger connection to family, to community and neighborhoods and colleagues, that we, self and others, then the whole world is included. So that's a very different way of thinking than thinking from the hindrances, these other ways, thinking from attachment. Also, this deep generative place of that where thinking can come is associated with mindfulness, with awareness. It's generative of certain kind of attention here in the present moment. Partly because it feels so nourishing, that it feels like the feeling of nourishment that it tends to bring, or contentment or well-being, tends to kind of awaken a kind of feeling of being connected to oneself, where we're aware, we're connected. Discursive thinking, we tend to be disconnected from the wholeness of who we are. We're in this world of thoughts and constructs and fantasy and things. And we're divided from ourselves. We're sometimes alienated from ourselves because of that discursive world of thinking. And so there's awareness that comes from it. There is clarity. We start seeing more clearly what's here. There is a kind of a wonderful generative energy, that vitality that can come. Rather than the thinking being draining us and tiring us, it's actually, there's kind of, feels like it's kind of self-generating and can go on for a long time. And there's joy. There's kind of a sense of well-being. The Buddha associates it with tranquility, being calm. He associated it with being focused. to be able to be really here and focused and present for what's going on. And he associates it with a source for equanimity. Equanimity being not being reactive to what's going on. The discursive mind is the reactive mind. So I don't know, how much, I'm just making this up, but I associate this papancha discursive mind as, I think it's very important not to, I'll get back to what I was going to look the sentence, but it's very important not to treat the discursive mind as any kind of enemy. It can cause a lot of problems, it could cause a lot of difficulty, and maybe it sounds a little bit negative, it's attachment and self-conceit and all that. I think it's very important not to treat it as an enemy, because in this womb-like approach, everything gets included, everything has a place. We're concerned about the welfare of everything. And so I associate the discursive thought as being surface thinking. And what I mean by that is kind of like it's associated with the muscles of our body. And that's where we have to operate when it's fight or flight. If there's danger, that we're set up to fight or flight, or some people to freeze. But that's kind of in the muscles of our body, that they get activated quickly and engaged. And the muscles are, I would, in my kind of way of talking here, more surface, compared to this womb-like place, which is deep into the organs, deep into our deeper nervous system, in our hearts, maybe we would say, in the West rather than the womb, maybe. And it comes from a different source that's deeper inside. But the fact that the discursive thought is associated with survival, it has an important role. And maybe sometimes it has that world of discursive thinking, maybe, and what comes from it, and the emotions connected to it, has in fact helped some people actually to survive. And sometimes fantasy even, and discourse, and being lost. Some people, that's the only way they have gotten some relief and some escape from horrendous kind of life that they're living. So we want to be very careful not to treat disrespectfully this world of discursive thinking. And this is where this ability to have some equanimity and some open awareness, some kindness, in order to envelop or hold or look at the discursive thought is so important. And because then it has a chance to relax. It's almost like that part of us who what it needs is to be seen by something that cares for it, that sees it with respect. And so when there's a lot of discursive thinking, and you can maybe look at where's the source of this? Where's this coming from? And maybe get a sense of this deeper source, maybe in some certain emotions or feelings or attitudes. And or maybe places in your body where it's coming from. And then ask yourself the question, what would help settle this part of you? What would help this part of who you are feel reassured, or to relax, or to kind of feel safer, to make room for a more interconnection way of being in the world that includes this deeper possibility. When we get underneath the musculature, maybe some people call it the armor that's on the surface, we get from that deeper place that's softer, more sensitive, quieter, maybe even shyer. It's not going to show itself so easily unless we get quiet and calm. But allow that to give time for that to emerge and to meet the discursive part. And kind of be in conversation with each other. And kind of maybe go for a walk hand in hand or something, so that there's a kind of a different relationship to discursive thought than how we usually do it, which is just giving into it and just letting it run. So it's important not to let your mind have a mind of its own, where it's in charge and it's just kind of running you. There is this deeper source, that maybe we don't call the mind, we call the heart, or we call the womb, or something, that that is very generative and really brings forth some of the most beautiful qualities of a human being. And so, so how to relate to all this, how to look at it, and realize that there may be a different way than how business has been going as usual for you. And maybe you can hang a sign someday saying, under new management. And so I hope that this talk has been offered you something that you kind of, some new approach, new idea that inspires you to take a good, deep look at yourself and to kind of question and how business as usual is in your mind and say, is this really the way to go? Is this really how it has to be? Even though it's been this way for 50 years, does this really have to be this way? And so there was actually more to what I wanted to say based on my retreat. So I'll just say a little snippet, and maybe when I come back in a few weeks, maybe if I remember, I can talk about this other half. And that is that it was wonderful at the retreat. One of the wonderful things on this retreat was that at some point it became fairly easy for me. I had the discursive thought operating at times, thinking mind and going, and I could just shut it off. I wasn't in control how long it stayed off, but I could shut it off for a bit, and that was fascinating. To then see what forms of knowing and what forms of thinking emerge kind of spontaneously, kind of almost like they weren't me. It was just like they were just arising without the discursive thought kind of filling the room, filling the space. You've probably all been in a group of people where one person dominates, and so no one else can speak, and maybe you can't speak. Well, that's what's going on for you. The discursive one, the puppeteer, has been filling the room, and if your mental space, your awareness space, is actually very expensive real estate, and you don't want to waste it on the discursive, filling it with the discursive mind. There's other ways of knowing, other ways of thinking that give them a chance. And the discursive thought will not going to go that far away. So it'll get its turn. But it might be time for just deeper voices, other ways of knowing to surface. So that was the other half of the talk, but maybe that's another time to say more about that. So I'm going to stop early, 10 minutes before the usual stopping. And what I'd like to, so you're welcome to leave if you like in a few minutes when I talking. And I thank you for being here. Some people come here just to be quiet and not to be in community, and so I respect that a lot. Or just sit here quietly. But what I'd like to suggest, since we have tea today, is that you turn towards one or two people near you and just say hello and maybe offer your name if you will, or just something simple that you want to say. And maybe that's it, and then you can go. Or you have a teeny conversation about what your thoughts are, what happened to you listening to these ideas and these thoughts, and is there anything useful here for you in it? And it might, but when you have this conversation with each other, don't be careful how much you talk. It's very easy once people start talking to not stop or feel like they have to say everything. Make your comments relatively short. Don't tell long stories. And so you can go back and forth, ping pong kind of thing. I think that's really nice. And as you form your little groups of 2 or 3, just have a little bit of mindfulness around you in case for someone near you, it hasn't been easy to find someone because of the way people turn and they're sitting there kind of like alone. So just look around and invite them into your little group. And then I'll ring the bell and now, and maybe about 6-7 minutes. And so some of you can sit silent, some of you can go, and then afterwards we'll have tea, and then you've already broken the ice and met some people. Maybe you want to stay. So please, go, say hello to each other.